Well, hello and welcome to the ASIS Economist Board. We're going to discuss current economic environment. As you all know, it's a little bit crazy right now as it relates primarily to industrial production. But one of the things that my colleague Keith always tells me is that industrial production is a great indicator about where the overall economy is going. So each of our industrial production models incorporates data going back over 20 years from 18 to 20 different economic indices. We tortured the data till it tells us the answer that we want. And in this video and the 7 related subsectors, we're going to dig into what those underlying factors are. Whether or not we used a waterboard method or whatever to extract the data, the information that we want, and try to relate it to what we're seeing in the real world. I'm John Nelson. I'm here with Keith Prather of Armada, and I'm from M&A. How you doing today, Keith?
Doing fantastic. Ready to do this.
Yeah, you're looking rather sporty. Get your tie on.
Yeah. I got to speak to some military professionals this morning, so very proud of that. Yep, had a great time, and you were there as well. So
I was. That was a great presentation. Thank you for that.
It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so let's take a quick look at industrial production for manufacturing. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I can find the button to share my screen. Here we go. It's always a challenge. Okay, so I got the right model, and of course I didn't get the right control. Here we go. So what you're seeing is the model generally looks the same, but as you and I were talking beforehand, a little bit more of that downturn in advance. I wouldn't get so worried about that immediate drop off. It's kind of consistent. If you look at the top end of the cone, kind of mirrors the top end of the drop off that we would see on our previous report. But what you are seeing is that it's leveling off at a level that is lower than what we thought. Now we're talking the out months, a lot further out there. That year from now, when we thought it would start to pick up a little bit, seeing a little bit flattening out. One of the things that I was talking to you, Keith, about was the sensitivity of this particular model to retail sales. And when I look back at the data, there was a big difference in the retail sales that was going into the models from last month to this month. And you could really see how that changed our outlook for industrial production. So I'm going to throw that bone to you and see where you want to take it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things, and you and I've talked about it many times, that industrial production and manufacturing is, specifically really has a lot of tight correlations to things like the entire transportation and supply chain industry, raw material demand. You think about the supply chain and think about everything that happens up and down the supply chain, and this is like the big melting pot of those variables. IP-Man covers everything from the durable goods sectors, so aircraft, machinery, all those things that we talk about, in the ASIS products, but it also includes the other side of the equation, which is the non-durables. So everything that we buy in, Walmart, Target, or wherever we shop, it's all those products as well. So it's a real good barometer for consumer spending. Again, it leads typically what happens in transportation activity, trucking. So if you're a transportation carrier, of any kind, you would be able to use this forecast to get a good idea of what we're seeing, at least in the next 18 months ahead. And, your accuracy on these models have been fantastic, John. I mean, we're up in the high, 98, 99% range, over, over 2 quarters or 3 quarters. So anyway, it's interesting. And when we actually look at the current data and what the model's telling us, and again, we don't have any real heavy personal opinion that goes into this. I mean, it's economic metrics, it's all data-driven analysis. And so it's fascinating that the analysis, the curves are actually showing some of that volatility, pressure, uncertainty that we're now kind of hearing, in the marketplace. So you're right. I mean, we have nice highs in industrial production kind of coming through February and March, highs as I glance back that maybe we haven't seen since, maybe the 2005, 2006 period. But then it kind of flatlines on us, and it does flatten out, and we have lost the end of the curve. And what's interesting is as you listen to analysts talk about when the next real economic pressure comes in, we think about forecasts from like the New York Federal Reserve, several other institutions, they're kind of circling, as we talked about earlier, Q2 and Q3 of next year as maybe being a period when we see a little bit of recession risk. And so it's just fascinating that the models are picking that up and showing us some of that same weakness kind of coming into 23.
One
So
thing I wanted to mention, you touched on it real briefly about the correlation to the transportation industry. And you've been telling me that for quite some time. And you asked me to take a look at it one time. And I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but we saw that the correlation between IP man and transportation, particularly, let's say trucking, was like 75 to 80%. It was unbelievable how well you could just map IP man to the trucking industry volumes.
absolutely, that was a daily shipment count number that we used, and we're trying to map it for a client. And yeah, the correlation was super tight. We also found similar correlations across rail. As we look at carload activity, and carload activity had a tight correlation to it. I would venture to say that we could probably even find that same correlation on the maritime sector, and then maybe a little bit less so with air cargo. But yeah, all modes of transportation are going to map very closely to this, and we do have a number of executives that really use try and get an idea of whether they need to increase capacity, reduce capacity, whether it's a good time to invest, a good time to sit tight, what to do about hedging fuel, not hedging fuel. And we see the same thing in manufacturing. We have clients that will take a look at this and get an idea whether they need to be stockpiling raw materials, or whether it's a good time, since prices are so high, to be able to sit back, maybe ride out current inventories for a while, know they've got a little bit of a soft patching, wait for those commodity prices to come down and then jump back in. So a lot of uses. We know some of our biggest subscribers are Wall Street analysts trying to get an idea of very specific names and brands and what may be happening to those names and brands based on what they're seeing in the models. So looking at the economy and trying to speculate what's coming. And what's fascinating is just that we're seeing, just the models really kind of play things out for us and tell the story. So
Sure.
it is fascinating.
Well, I'm going to give you another look at this, give you that long range trend.
Yeah.
And that long range trend, you show that nice line. And at first, you kind of, what stands out is that little hook, the downturn. But then when you look at it, another thing to look at is you notice that flattening out. It almost kind of just a couple points below is following the trend line again. So it's not that far off.
Yeah, it doesn't look like deep recession, right? So if you go back to the 2008 period or even 2001, I mean, look how deep those contractions were across industrial production. And the forecast right now is not showing anything close to that. It's still showing a fairly solid, healthy industry. And this would be the data would be picking up things like reshoring and nearshoring activity. Some of the sectors that have been idle for more than 2 years now kind of coming back to life. And so it's still showing consistency. It's just showing a rough patch over the next through maybe August here, where it's going to feel like we're decelerating into what looks like maybe a little tougher time. So
well, and if you look at the curve, it's remarkable how close it is. Let me see if I can get it. No, you can see right there around 2018, we have almost the same drop kind of look and feel as at what we're predicting for this period of time. So in 2018 seemed like a pretty decent time to me. It wasn't recession. It was just a pullback a little bit.
But it was a great year. And I will go back to, I had a conversation just the other day with the CEO in transportation. And he was thinking back to the 2018, 2019 period, and coming out of 18, we were looking at curves like this. And at the time we didn't have these forecasts built. That's one of the reasons why you and I did this. But we were looking at it 2019 and thinking, okay, Q1 started off with a bang, and we thought, well, 2019 is going to be fantastic. And everything just dropped off a cliff going into the end of the year. And his transportation and freight volumes were down, and everyone was scratching their heads. And it just had to do with inventories and the way inventories worked companies just got a little ahead of their skis, a little out over their skis, and so they pulled back on reorders. They weren't building raw materials as fast. They weren't building finished goods as fast. They were kind of sitting in those inventories, knowing we're kind of coming into an election year and there's a lot of uncertainty. And then, of course, no one could have predicted COVID, but that slowdown, as you said, was kind of happening before we even knew about a pandemic. So yeah, we've seen it before.
I'm going to pull up the year over year because you're talking
Yeah.
about comparing a couple of years. And you mentioned what, 2019 specifically?
Yeah.
2019 is that gray line running right through the middle here. And then our forecast is our dashed line looking here.
Yeah, and look at that, because the gray line, if you look at Q1, well, actually the way we do this is Q4. So you get, this is a perfect reason why we do it, right? So you get the Q4 look coming out of 18 and coming into 19, and you can look and see sort of how that curve looked. And we were thinking, wow, healthy environment, super strong coming into the end of the year, ought to be great. And then it just started this slow precipitous decline all the way throughout. And but anyway, yeah, and look at where we are, this year. Obviously, we're still, it feels really good. It's just that the curves are giving us some warning signs and things that we need to pay attention to. The one thing that we did not talk about, and you and I both know, I mean, right now everyone wants to know about the impact of the war. They want to know about the impact of COVID in China. And right now, some of the metrics that go into this are definitely measures of inflation. Not standard inflation like PCE, but very specific areas of inflation that affect manufacturing. And we've tailored it custom to really understand the pushes and the pulls and the pressures in this industry. And so when you think about what's happening to global commodity prices, especially in the metals sector, so everything from aluminum to steel to raw metal that's used in steel production, iron ore, all of that is elevated right now. And we're getting to that point where it's starting to weigh on the models, and the models are picking that pressure up. And we know that there's usually a negative response to that inflationary pressure. So that's partially what's pushing it down. Generally, demand, if you're just looking at demand metrics, demand to manufacturing generally looks good. It looks like construction's generally going to be good. And so there's a lot of things that would be pushing it higher. And again, it's trending kind of higher right now. But again, at least for now, subject to change, the models are seeing a more sluggish period coming up.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think that concludes our look at industrial production for manufacturing, and hope you tune in next month. And if you are a subscriber and you get behind the login, you can take a look at the remaining of our sectors where we'll do a detailed dive. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Everyone take care.